Tears as a universal language of grief. Tears are a language we all understand. Across cultures, generations, and even species, tears are a raw, unfiltered reaction to life's most profound moments. But when we cry in grief, something unique happens. Tears carry the weight of loss, love, and longing. Tears as a universal language of grief. Welcome to this exploration of tears as a universal language of grief. Today, we'll uncover why we cry, the role tears play in healing, and how they connect us across cultures and continents. Let's begin with the science behind our tears. The biology of tears. What are tears? Tears are more than just salty water. They are complex, dynamic fluids that serve multiple purposes in our body. Basal tears keep eyes lubricated and prevent dryness. Reflex tears flush out irritants like smoke, dust, or onion vapors. Emotional tears triggered by feelings of sadness, joy, or grief. It's the emotional tears that intrigue scientists the most because they're directly linked to our brain's emotional centers. How emotional tears are formed. When we experience intense emotions, the brain sends signals to the lacrimal glands to produce tears. These tears are unique. They contain stress hormones, which might explain why crying can feel so relieving. This biological response shows that crying is more than a reflex, it's a physical expression of our emotions. The cultural universality of tears. Tears in different cultures. Tears are universal, but how we express and interpret them varies widely across cultures. Japan, reserved and private expressions of grief. In Japan, grief is often expressed in a more reserved, introspective way. The cultural emphasis on maintaining harmony and respect for others leads to quieter, more private displays of emotion. The Japanese value personal privacy and social etiquette, which means that outward expressions of grief are generally controlled. Instead of loud wailing or overt displays of sorrow, people in Japan often mourn through subdued rituals. Funeral practices. At Japanese funerals, the ceremonies are deeply structured, with family members and guests often refraining from loud or emotional outbursts. Grieving is typically expressed through quiet tears, head bows, and a respectful demeanor. Quiet tears. It's not uncommon for mourners to shed tears during ceremonies, but they are typically done in private or in subdued, controlled manners. The emotional burden is often carried inwardly, with individuals focusing on their personal loss in a more restrained manner. Spiritual connections. Japanese mourning customs are also connected to Shintoism and Buddhism. Offerings are made to spirits, and prayers are said for the peaceful rest of the deceased, with an emphasis on familial ties and ancestral reverence. The process is deeply personal, and the internalization of grief is seen as part of the healing journey. Public versus private. The distinction between private and public grief is important in Japanese culture. While public displays of sorrow may occur in a group setting, such as in a family's home or at a public funeral, the act of mourning is usually kept private and introspective. Public mourning rituals tend to focus more on ritual respect and less on individual emotional expression. Mexico. Dia de los Muertos. Celebration and mourning intertwined. Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, is a Mexican tradition that blends mourning with celebration, creating a unique approach to grief. Instead of focusing solely on sadness, this holiday emphasizes remembering and honoring the dead with both tears and joy. It's a time when grief and celebration coexist, allowing families to reconnect with their loved ones who have passed. The celebration, Dia de los Muertos, is celebrated on November 1st and 2nd, coinciding with the Catholic observances of All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. The holiday is marked by vibrant festivals, lively music, dances, and colorful altars, known as ofrendas, dedicated to deceased family members, tears and laughter. While the holiday is celebratory, it also serves as a time for reflection and remembrance. Families create altars decorated with marigolds, candles, and favorite foods of the departed. They gather at cemeteries, sometimes sharing stories about their deceased loved ones. Though the atmosphere is joyful, it's not devoid of sadness. Tears flow as family members remember their loved ones, but these tears are often mixed with laughter as stories, music, and memories are shared. The belief in life after death. The underlying belief of Dia de los Muertos is that the souls of the deceased return to the world of the living for a brief time. During this period, families celebrate their loved ones' lives with offerings and remembrance. The mourning process is not about letting go, but about maintaining a connection with the departed, blending grief with celebration. This intertwining of mourning and celebration represents a view of death that is not to be feared, but embraced as part of the ongoing cycle of life. It provides a space for individuals to grieve openly, while also finding joy in the memory of the deceased, fostering a sense of community and continuity across generations. Nigeria. Public wailing and expressive mourning rituals. In Nigeria, particularly within traditional communities, public mourning is a significant cultural practice. Grief is often expressed openly, with an emphasis on collective emotional expression. This communal aspect of mourning helps to reinforce the social fabric and offers support to the bereaved. Nigeria's diverse ethnic groups, including the Yoruba, Igbo, and Hausa, each have their own distinct mourning rituals, but public displays of grief are common across these cultures. Wailing and crying. Public wailing, loud crying, and even physical displays of grief are a key part of Nigerian mourning rituals. These displays are seen as a way of expressing the intense emotional pain that comes with losing a loved one. Wailing is typically done by close family members, especially the mother, siblings, or children of the deceased. In some cases, professional mourners, known as Elijah, are hired to lead the wailing to ensure that the funeral atmosphere reflects the sorrow of the community. Community involvement. Funerals are often large communal events where neighbors, extended family, and friends gather to mourn together. The mourning process is not isolated to the immediate family, but involves the whole community, offering comfort, solidarity, and collective healing. Food, music, and dance can also be part of the funeral process, reflecting the balance between grief and celebration of the deceased's life. Rituals and ceremonies. Traditional rituals vary by ethnic group. For example, the Yoruba might hold a wakekeep the night before the funeral, where family and friends gather to reminisce and mourn. The Igbo often observe Ikiru, the traditional burial, which includes public displays of grief. Throughout these ceremonies, mourners perform rituals to honor the deceased and ensure their peaceful transition to the afterlife. Emphasis on ancestor worship. In many Nigerian cultures, ancestral reverence is central to mourning practices. The deceased are seen as having an ongoing role in the lives of the living, and rituals often involve calling upon ancestors to protect and bless the family. Mourning is as much a way of honoring the deceased as it is about dealing with the emotional weight of their absence. Cultural significance. Public mourning in Nigeria is deeply tied to the notion of communal solidarity. It is a way to honor the deceased, provide support for the bereaved, and reaffirm the bonds within a community. The mourning rituals are meant to help the family move through the pain of loss, while being surrounded by the emotional support of others. Comparison and summary. Japan's grieving is characterized by restraint, with private and subtle expressions of sorrow, reflecting cultural values of respect, emotional control, and societal harmony. Mexico offers a contrasting approach, where mourning is integrated with celebration, viewing death not as an end, but as part of the cycle of life. Grief and joy coexist through vibrant rituals and remembrance. Nigeria focuses on communal grieving, with expressive mourning that includes loud wailing and public rituals, highlighting the collective nature of grief and the importance of community in the healing process. Each culture provides its own lens through which to view grief, illustrating the diverse ways humans cope with loss, while reinforcing cultural identity and values. Cultural influences on crying. In collectivist cultures, public displays of grief, like crying, can be a way to invite communal support. In more individualistic societies, crying is often seen as a private act, regardless of the cultural lens. Tears signal grief, vulnerability, and a need for a connection. Tears in psychology and healing. Why crying helps us heal. Crying releases oxytocin and endorphins, chemicals that help us feel calmer and less distressed. Emotional tears are essentially the body's way of self-soothing. Suppressing tears, on the other hand, can prolong grief and even lead to emotional numbness. Personal stories of grief and tears. A widow's story. After he passed, I couldn't cry at first. I was in shock, I suppose. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching my life unfold from a distance. For weeks, I kept myself busy sorting out the paperwork, organizing the funeral, taking care of everyone else. But inside, I felt hollow, like I was carrying a weight too heavy to bear. It wasn't until I found his favorite sweater, buried in the closet, that it hit me. I pressed it to my face and smelled his scent. That's when the tears came. I sank to the floor and cried like I'd never cried before. It felt like all the pain, all the love, all the loss I'd been holding in just poured out of me. And you know what? Afterward, I felt lighter. Not because the pain was gone, it wasn't. And it never will be, but because I'd finally allowed myself to grieve. It was as though those tears carried away a part of the burden I was holding inside. Her tears didn't erase the loss, but they opened the door to healing. For many, the first cry after loss is a pivotal step on the journey through grief. A young man's story. When I lost my best friend, Malik, I didn't cry, not at first. I told myself I had to stay strong, whatever that meant. I thought crying would make it worse, like it would make the pain too real to handle. Instead, I bottled it all up. I went back to work, hung out with people, kept myself busy. But inside, I felt like I was breaking apart. It wasn't until a few weeks later, at a small gathering with our mutual friends, that everything spilled out. Someone started telling a funny story about Malik, one of those stories that perfectly captured who he was, and I just lost it. I started crying right there in front of everyone. At first, I was embarrassed, but then, something incredible happened. Crying in front of them, it was like breaking open a dam. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in my grief. We all cried together, laughed together, and for the first time, I was able to talk about how much I missed him. It was at that moment I realized, grief doesn't have to be something you go through alone. Crying didn't make me weak. It helped me connect to Malik's memory, and to the people who loved him, just as much as I did. For him, tears were the bridge to shared healing and deeper connection. Grief, when shared, becomes a path to rediscovering strength and love. These testimonials showcase the transformative power of vulnerability, emphasizing how tears not only relieve internal pressure, but also foster connection and mutual healing. Tears are not a sign of weakness, they're a vital part of the healing process. Scientific insights into tears and grief. Chemistry of tears. Scientists have found that emotional tears contain higher levels of proteins and hormones like prolactin and cortisol. How crying affects the brain. Crying activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which slows your heart rate and helps you relax. This is why many people feel a sense of calm after a good cry. Tears as connection and empathy. Tears build human connections. When we cry in front of others, we invite empathy. This vulnerability strengthens relationships and fosters trust. Tears in literature and media. From ancient epics to modern films, tears have always been a symbol of profound emotion. They remind us of our shared humanity. Tears in literature and media. From ancient texts to blockbuster films, tears have transcended time as a universal symbol of deep emotion. They capture moments of grief, joy, regret, and love, reminding us of our shared humanity. Odysseus crying in the Odyssey. Then, throwing his arms around his dear wife, he wept. Tears of longing, of joy, and of pain. In Homer's The Odyssey, Odysseus cries not just from physical exhaustion, but from an overwhelming mix of joy and longing. His tears humanize him, making the great hero relatable and vulnerable, a man deeply connected to his family and home. Odysseus' tears are pivotal in Greek literature. They mark the hero's transition from a figure of strength to one of emotional depth. His tears communicate his humanity in a way words alone cannot. Iconic movie scenes of tears. The Pursuit of Happiness. In The Pursuit of Happiness, Chris Gardner's tears symbolize triumph over hardship. They evoke empathy by allowing the audience to feel the weight of his struggles and the magnitude of his achievement. Forrest Gump. Forrest's tears show the depth of his devotion to Jenny and the pain of losing her. It's a moment that resonates universally, a reminder of the fragility of life and the entrance of love. Inside Out. Even in animated films like Inside Out, tears are used to communicate complex emotions, teaching audiences young and old the value of vulnerability. Emotional reflection. Tears in literature and media are not just a reaction, they are a tool to connect audiences to characters, and characters to their own humanity. They bridge the gap between fiction and reality, uniting us through shared experiences of joy, loss, and redemption. Tears, a universal language across time and art. Tears are a testament to the depth of our emotions. They connect us, heal us, and remind us of the love we carry, even in grief.